phenomenal way to start this group. When you were doing the invocation and you were talking about centering oneself, I was thinking about a segment I saw from something called The Church of 80% Sincerity. And it was a play that happened in San Francisco back in the mid-'80s when I first arrived in the Bay Area. And this woman had the group stand up and she went, "Let us all center ourselves so we can become more self-centered." So my intention for today is that we have fun, that it's funny, witty, and we go deep. Because that's really where I like to go with anything. And so today's talk is called Accessing Divine Wisdom. And the place that I want to start from is to ask you a question. And I'd love to receive an answer from you. What was your earliest vision or understanding of God? What was God to you? Anyone? What was God?
Something apart, out there, a guy.
Did he have white hair?
Yes.
Yes.
Was he a white man with white hair?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and that's kind of similar for most people. But I'm going to share with you the truth of what God was to me, because I figured it out at 4 years old. I figured out, and this is true, I figured out that God was a potato. For real. And this is how I came across with this. I understood this, great cosmological experience. I heard two pieces of information on the same day. So I'm helping my mother peel potatoes, and she said, "You see that growth on the potato? Well, those are called eyes." I learned potatoes have eyes. Okay. Later on, we're talking about this concept of, at least at that time, I didn't call it a concept. We were learning about this, the white man with the beard, called God. And my mother said, God has eyes. God can see you no matter where you are. Anywhere in the world, God can always see where you are. God can see me wherever I am, anywhere in the world. Potatoes have eyes. God can see me. Potatoes have eyes. And I put these two pieces of information together, and I realized that, of course, God is a potato. And then I remember the eye in the dollar bill. And so, it's in that pyramid. And so God was not only a potato, but I saw that pyramid with the eye, and I realized God is also a cyclops. So that was my experience of God. And talking about this with a friend as adults, and she said, well, this was her experience of God. She was 3 years old, and her mother had given her a helium balloon. So what happens to a 3-year-old holding a helium balloon? Does it last in that hand very long? No. They open it, the balloon goes flying up. My friend is absolutely devastated. She's lost her balloon. So her mother, in trying to comfort her, said, well, the balloon is going up to be with God. And so my little friend said, when I die, can I get my balloon back? So her understanding of God was that God is the keeper, is the balloon keeper, is the keeper of the world's balloons. And so, when we think about it, potato, balloon keeper, the debate over God keeps going on, doesn't it? So recently, I was in Florida in October, and I was teaching about how to get a book deal with a publisher, because that's what I do as a profession. I was in New York a couple weeks ago. I'm sitting with Penguin Random House and Hay House and all these major publishers, and helping my clients get book deals, because that's what I do. And so I was teaching in October for a very large business organization in Florida. And at a dinner table, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people in this room, this little 5-year-old came up to my table. And his mother also teaches on faculty for this big organization. And this 5-year-old came up and he said, my business is, remember he's five years old, I draw pictures that you can put on your refrigerator with magnets. Give me a 5, a 10, or a 20. And then he just stood there. I'm thinking, oh my God, you don't want to disappoint a little kid, but he's asking for, he said, give me a 10, a 20, or 100. 10, a 20, or 100. I thought about this for a second. The whole room is just all adults. He's the only child here. And I said, what can I get for $1? And he went like this, nothing. And he walked to another table, and by the end of 3 days, he had $400 in his pocket. So this is a 5-year-old with $400 in his pocket, and I'm thinking, no other adult probably closed sales in the room like this child. So I started, analyzing what is it that he did. So the first thing was his offer crystal clear? Could you get a visual picture of it in your mind? Yes. When he said, I draw pictures you can put on your refrigerator with magnets, we all get a visual picture in our mind. So when we're asking anything of the universe, are we as crystal clear as that? Are we delivering a picture that everybody can get? There's no ambiguity about it. So we talk about that, just being clear, asking to be clear. Can you get a visual picture of it? Yes, we all got that picture. Was his ask clear? Yes. Give me a 10, a 20, or 100. He was crystal clear about it. No ambiguity. When I asked, what could I get for $1? Was he willing to compromise his value? No! So what did he do? Did he feel like when he didn't get a response from my table, did he have a pity party? Did he consider himself a failure? Did he give up on his dream? No. What did he do? Big smile on his face. He didn't take it as rejection. He just walked off to another table. What was the result? $400 in the hands of a 5-year-old. Later on, I discovered, somebody told me that his mother had just led a marketing cruise. And on this cruise, he had been asking for $1, a $5, or a $10. And when he was getting that consistently, he upped his value to my conference, and he was not willing to compromise his value. These are such important lessons for us. So I started thinking about what is it that we're willing to ask for in our own lives. And it happened to me this morning. Our refrigerator went out. Our new 8-month-old, $2,000 stainless steel, whatever, sub-zero, whatever, refrigerator went totally out. So we're running around, filling up, and that's why my housemate Suzanne's not here, because she's getting ice and bringing food over to neighbors in tote bags. And so, I was helping her right before, and I'm thinking, I don't know most of the neighbors in my neighborhood. How comfortable do I feel in asking? Like, that child was fearless. He didn't know any of us, hundreds of people in a room, but he was fearless. And so I was noticing in my own consciousness, how comfortable, or am I willing to go ask people I don't know? And it was just like, at some point I realized that all of us, or maybe most of us, have experienced something that I call the devastating no. Something that maybe as a child we asked to be, do, or have, and we were denied it. And from that no, all of a sudden we put on all of this, this barrage, these walls, these barriers of not being able to even ask for what it is we want. For me as a child, I was 6 years old, and my parents said, do you want to play an instrument? And I said, yes. And they said, what? And I said, drums. And they said, here's a clarinet. So here's, our wonderful music teacher in the room, and you will understand this. I played third chair clarinet from, grade school, elementary school, through high school, horribly. I hated every note I ever played, and I didn't play it well. And so now as an adult, I have 17 drums, and for some reason my neighbors still like me.
We love you.
Thank you. So it was but I was just realizing that. I just kind of got this download this morning of something I call the devastating no, where we were told something that, many of us were told something that we wanted to either be, do, or have, and we were told no. And it stops us from asking for what we want or need or anything in our lives. And it was just really interesting for me to, to trace that back in my mind and see where that happened. Like when we were listening to Happy, this music, if I had been in the back row, I probably would have gotten up because nobody would have seen me in the front, and I probably would have danced. Or I would have waved my arms. But I wasn't willing to do that in the front. Why? Why am I censoring myself? This is happy music, this is joyful music, but there's still that part where there's like judgment or comparison or just fear or whatever it is that's still going on. It's like, why aren't we allowing ourselves to be free, to be truly who we are and what we really want to express? In my mind, I was dancing, I was up, I was waving my arms, I was having more fun. So these are just things, just sitting with all of these awarenesses. Like, why do I stop myself? And more importantly, what do I want to do to move forward? To say it's all right, it's safe. Like, I was thinking about this child that I'm talking about, little Gabriel, who has no fear of asking anybody for anything. Give me a 10, a 20, or 100. And, with joy, no fear of rejection, no nothing. And was he busy, I was thinking about his skill set was, I can draw pictures you can put on your refrigerator. He wasn't saying in his mind, well, Johnny or Janie draws better pictures than I do. He wasn't comparing himself to another person. He was just saying, this is my skill set, this is who I am, and this is what I'm asking for, with a very clear offer. We can do this. We can learn from these little kids. Okay, so let's see, where do I want to move? There was a book I was reading recently in which the author was talking about the difference between God is all-knowing and God is knowledge. And I thought this was really, really important. Where was this quote? Let's see. God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, not all-powerful, but all-power, not all-knowing, but all-knowledge and present everywhere. All knowledge and present everywhere. God is all knowledge and present everywhere. And one of the books I edited recently was, actually a couple years ago, was a book by a man named Don Saunders about knowing the power of how life works. And Don Saunders was a VP at Kodak when Kodak was still doing just regular old film. And he was a sales guy. And he said, like, he was a little league dad, had not 1 ounce of metaphysical understanding at all. Except when Don was 11 years old, he started asking himself a question. And he asked this question for all the years of his life. He said, I would go outside, I'd look out at the stars at night, and I would say, how does this all work? How does this all work? And at age 56, the universe showed Don. And what happened was Don woke up completely paralyzed, absolutely completely paralyzed, but he could see, he couldn't speak, nothing. He couldn't even ask his, gesture to his wife in the bed next to him. Next to him in bed. And he said, all he could do was, all I could see was the clock at the foot of my bed. And he said, for about 23 minutes, the hard drive of my brain was deleted. Everything just deleted. And within 1 minute, he received the knowledge of the universe. And so I want to share some of the things that Don learned from firsthand experience. Because the only way we know that something is really true for us is if we experience it ourselves. So this was Don's experience, and I just want to share it. So he said what he physically saw, was that our thoughts are not inside of us. Our thoughts exist between us, in the field between us. He could see the thoughts. He saw life in rocks and in every object, even things that we would consider inanimate objects. He said everything is alive, everything. He also saw that, as Carl Jung talked about, like the, what does Carl call it? Like the whole universal consciousness. He saw it. And he said we have access to absolutely every thought that's ever existed. It's all in this field, huge field of consciousness. And it exists between us and the field. So in truth, we can ask for absolutely anything we want, whether it's knowledge or things or whatever we want to be, do, or have, because there's access to all information for every single person in this universe. I thought that's really, really fascinating. It's like, we hear about, like, there's no thought that hasn't been thought before. If it's all in this big soupy field of everywhere, then we have access to everything. There is nothing that we can't ask for, which means there is everything that we can ask for, whatever that might be. So I really like that. One of my friends talks about God as God. And the reason she calls God God is because she says that God is the image she gets of the man with the white beard. My mind, God is still partially potato, Cyclops type potato. But she said God has no visual picture for her at all. And it's beyond our understanding, above and beyond our understanding. And I kind of like that. I think that's really cool. Like some people are really typed into, they're really drawn into, or tuned in is the word I want, to higher consciousness and psychic stuff. There's some people that just have that ability. They're just really, really open to it. And all the information that they're receiving, I believe, is in that universal soupy field. And there is an author named Robert Moss. There are actually 2 Robert Moss authors that I've seen. This is the guy, some of you may know, who does dreams. He's, a shaman guy who does dream stuff and death stuff. And I was editorial director for a national Zen-based greeting card company some years ago called Brush Dance. Many of you may not know that name, but if you were in any New Age bookstore, you would recognize their calendars and journals. And I used to pick out the quotes that went into all the spiritual quotes, like Thich Nhat Hanh quotes that went into all the journals and the calendars and things like that. And so Robert Moss was somebody I had recruited to write articles for an email newsletter. And he was up in Canada, and I was in the Bay Area at the time. He was coming through the Bay Area. And so he said, hey, I'd love to get together with you for lunch. I said, great. So we go out to lunch, and we're sitting there. Remember, this is a person doesn't really know me. We've just had some email business exchanges. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden I think he's bored with what I'm saying because he goes like this. And all of a sudden he turns around and he said, I have a message for you from somebody named Shulam. Shulam was my grandfather's Jewish name. My grandfather who died like 30 years ago. And it's like, okay, now he's really got my attention. And he said that the message was, and here he's using language that he doesn't know because the message was in Hebrew. And he said, Shulam says he wants you to daven and study the Merkava. Well, daven is usually it's a form of prayer done by the Hasidic men, typically the Orthodox men, in which they're bobbing. They're reading and they're bobbing very fast, and so they're going into some kind of trance. That's what they're doing. So, and then, let's see, there was the davening and the Merkava. Well, in Hebrew, the beit and the veit, the B and the V are interchangeable. Merkava is the Merkabah. And I thought this is really fascinating. And Robert Moss told me he had completely downloaded an ancient Mohawk language. I mean, the guy, it's like he doesn't even know what the words are, and all of a sudden he's getting the meaning of all of them because it's in the universal field of consciousness. I just thought, this is really, really amazing when we talk about accessing divine wisdom, and it's all there. It's all there, whatever it is that we're looking for. I had an experience that I wrote about in my first book, Crappy to Happy, Small Steps to Big Happiness Now. And for those who don't know, Julia Roberts holds up this book in a bookstore scene in the movie Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh.
And I didn't even know they were going to use it. I'm sitting in the movie theater, opening night of Eat, Pray, Love. I'm in Santa Cruz. I'm with my housemate Suzanne, a circle of women friends. Hey, let's go out to dinner. Let's go see the movie. And there's a bookstore scene before Julia Roberts goes on her big trip. And she's looking in the self-help section, and the book she picks up off the shelf and buys is Crappy to Happy. I had no idea they were even going to use it. I'm just sitting in a movie theater, which is really, really kind of fun and exciting. So there's one story in here that I call the not so near-death experience. And my experience was, I'm a very lucid dreamer. Any lucid dreamers here? I mean, you just get a lot of people, it's really clear information in dreams. And so I'm asleep one night, and all of a sudden I'm in a taxi, and pretty soon the taxi is off of the ground and up in the sky, and then I'm standing in the air, as though air is a perfectly fine place to be standing with the taxi driver. And I realize I'm seeing heaven. I had never had a concept of heaven really before. I mean, I grew up Jewish, and it's not the same as Christian cloud heaven. I just wasn't. I had no concept of what heaven is. But my experience in this dream was just seeing this, the only way I could describe it, it's like this crystalline, very pure essence energy. And the words that I use to describe it are like crystalline, and I don't even know how to explain crystalline, except that was my experience. And then it seemed to me like there was light coming from various clouds, and I thought, I wonder if every cloud has an angel, and it seems like everybody's working very hard up there, but it's absolutely silent, but there's all this work going on. And then I'm looking down at nature, I'm looking down at gorgeous, beautiful nature everywhere, and then I'm hearing, it's time to return to your body. And I'm hearing that, and I find myself going back into my body, saying, now wake up, and then opening my eyes. I stayed completely conscious through every step of being out of body to hearing, go back into the body, and then opening my eyes, and I'm fully awake. And it made me think about death, and I was wondering, I wonder if death is like this. It was almost like as simple as, turning the dial on the TV, which this really dates me because nobody does this with the TV anymore, do they? It's like, okay, pushing the little button on the remote. And it made me think, I think this is what death is like. It's like, now you're here, click, click, now you're here, and it's as simple as that. And I've had some very interesting experiences and thoughts around the concept of death. And one is that every single year I go to this, I call it the feeding frenzy for the publishing industry in the United States. That's where I just came back from 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago when I was in New York, and I'm sitting with all these major publishers and pitching my clients' projects. And every year I would visit my parents in Connecticut beforehand. The show was in New York. And then I'd take a bus down to New York after I'd visit with my parents for a week. And when I would get on the bus to go to New York, the window was dark on the outside. I could see my parents perfectly, but they couldn't see me. And I'm watching them, kind of waving to them as my bus is taking off, and they're waving back, but they can't see me. And I thought, that was another thought of mine, I wonder if this is what death is like, from the other side, that we can see, people alive, but they can't see us. And so I had that thought about death. There's a woman named Linda Jacquin. I got to cover many years ago the International Association of Near-Death Studies, the IANS conference. I was up in Vancouver, and I was writing an article about it. And I met this woman, Linda Jacquin, who had a drowning experience as a child and met a brother who pushed her up out of the water, who she didn't even know she had a brother. She said, she came back from the experience, Mommy, who's Dennis? And the parents are freaked out because this little boy, and she felt just pushed her out. And she's had multiple near-death experiences. She had one during a surgery as an adult. And her experience was that she said that, and I've heard this consistently, perhaps you've heard this as well. She said that, Earth is school, but that experience that she had, that is home. And like when the world astronauts in those machines and they say, they have these big white light experiences, and people say there's no such thing as a near-death experience, it's just the brain doing something. None of those astronauts whirling around receiving that light says that's home. But consistently, near-death experiencers say that this is Earth's, this is school, that is home. And I think that's a really great distinguishing point. Do any of you know the author Barbara Brennan? She wrote Hands of Light, and she has the Barbara Brennan School of Healing in upstate New York. And I had an opportunity to interview her multiple times. And she told me this experience, and I love sharing this story because it's helped so many people, where her father was dying. And her father was the person she was closest to in the world. And she had heard that, and here's somebody she's about to, who's going to depart, and she's devastated, but she had heard this somewhere, that if you can stay totally present with the person and not go into states of grief, when they pass, they have a gift to give you. But if you go into that state of grief, or any other big feeling state where you can't be totally present there with them, you can't receive their gift, and it hurts them not to receive it. And so she wanted to be able to receive her father's gift. So she stayed totally present. I've done this myself in my own life, and my experience has been when I'm able to stay totally present with people I love the most in the world and be there for them when they've passed, the gift is this huge sense for me of light and peace. It's amazing. Like my mother, who I'm super bonded with, and I coached her through her death 2 summers ago. And I was on one side of the bed, my brother was on the other side of the bed, and I said, here's the person I love the most in the world. And I said, Mom, it's safe to go. Relax. It's okay. You can go. I love you. Ted, my brother, Ted loves you. Dad loves you. It's safe. You can go. And we let her go. She took her last breath, she was gone. And then last year, it was a year later, I'm in Atlanta visiting with my brother and my father. My father's 90, at that time was 90 years old. And they're in the front seat. My brother's driving, my father's in the front seat, I'm in the back seat. And I decided, I'm gonna call my mother in. And I didn't say anything out loud, but this is our family, my brother, me, my father. So I called her in my mind. And I know when she comes in because I feel my eyes get teary, but it's not tears of sorrow, it's tears because the love is so deep. And I could feel the tears coming. Remember, I've done all of this in silence, just sitting in the back seat. All of a sudden my brother in the front seat goes, I feel Mom. I've never felt her before. Right in the second where I'm feeling those tears. We have access to everyone we love. When my wonderful little dog Toby died, I had a dog who I found in 5 lanes of traffic. I had him for many years. People would say, what kind of a dog is he? I go, a red one. It's just a, he's a little mix. And when he died, I actually invited him to merge with me if he wanted to. And he did. And so this was my experience. I mean, I was so bonded with this dog for so many years. He was just such a great love. And so, I gave him permission. If you want to merge with me, you can. A lot of people are, there's like divided opinions about whether it's really okay to do this, but for me it was. And so I invited him, and it was about a week later, and again, in a lucid experience, there were like 3 beings, guides, angels, whatever. And they flew as one across a room, but there was no fluttering of, there were no wings, there was no fluttering of gowns or anything. They just came as like one unit, but there was this sparkling ball of blue energy, light, whizzing, whatever, and they put it in my body. And I knew that was Toby. That was my experience. And it made me think about, are we like, energy packets? Do we just turn into, like, people talk about orbs, are we just like energy in orbs? I don't know, I'm just, sharing personal experiences. So, I had many opportunities when I was in college, back in the olden days when dinosaurs ruled the earth. I was in college at UConn, which is not Alaska, but the University of Connecticut, where I grew up. And I had this incredible professor named Kenneth Rain, Dr. Kenneth Rain. And he was actually one of the founders with Raymond Moody of the entire near-death experience, where it made it safe for people to come out of the near-death experiencer's closet. And it seems like we're always coming out of closets, like some people now, channelers. I love to channel. I had to come out of the channeling closet. The gay closet for me was about 20 years ago. So, all these different closets that we get to come out of. And his experience, so Ken Ring, one of the books he wrote was called Mind Sight, in which he interviewed people who had near-death experiences who were either blind or deaf from birth. And people who were blind from birth in near-death experiences saw. People who were deaf heard in their near-death experiences. Are we whole and complete at the soul level? Certainly, it seems that way to me. One of the authors whose books I edited a couple of years ago, her name is Christine Contini. When she was 37, she had a cardiac arrest. And her experience really opened, all these different people I get to interview, they just opened my mind, expand my knowledge in my field. And she talked about something called the way station. Along the way, you stop at the way station. And when she says that out loud, most people think of the term way as in W-A-Y. But she said, no, it's the W-E-I-G-H, the way station, in which the burdens, the emotional burdens that you're carrying are weighed. And so, in this lifetime, I endeavor to, if I have like any conflict with anyone, and I'm always endeavoring to bring it to closure, to at least bring it to neutral, so I can bring as much emotional burden stuff, just clear it out of the field, as much as we can. Like, back when I was in my 20s, I worked for the City Pacifica Senior Center as the program coordinator, and my boss was a horrible human being, just terrible to work for, an intimidator. He did not treat people well. And he eventually died, and I kept doing forgiveness work over the years, like, oh yes, I forgive him. Then another time I'd be thinking about him, oh, and then the string of swear words would come out of my mind, going, okay, another layer of forgiveness is needed. And I went on with my life. 7 years later, 7 years go by, and this man appears in a lucid experience. And he's pointing to a chalkboard. That time was before whiteboards, I guess. And he's pointing to a chalkboard, and I said in my mind, oh, he's teaching me something. And I received a transmission of love that is beyond anything I've ever experienced on earth. And I realized this man is making he's like healing this. He's healing this experience. He's making his amends beyond the veil. And so I realized the place that we're all going to ultimately is just to love. That's the only thing there is. So I'm endeavoring to be that source of love on this planet now, which means how much of the stuff can I clear away as much as possible to release triggers or people or expectations or where do I need to forgive? I'm always looking at that. What can I clean up? Just clean it up. So we can be as absolutely as pure as possible. And let's see. What do I want to share? I want to share an experience of my uncle, because I think this is quite profound. I have an uncle named Stan Feigenbaum. And when Stan was 40 years old, he was a volunteer umpire in East Palo Alto for a high school after-school basketball league. There was a time that was called out on the play, and there was a debate about it, and the coaches came out, and he took off his umpire's mask, and he's talking with the coach, and they're arguing, and the pitcher pitches the ball intentionally, hits him in the head. My uncle goes down. He's in a coma for 6 months, not expected to live. He was hit in the head, and comes out as a quadriplegic, spends the next 24 years of his life with no ability to talk or use any part of his body except motion with his eyes. So he has to be fed. Every bit of personal care has to be done for him. Now, before this happened, my uncle was fascinated by the Battle of Little Bighorn. And he had amassed so much information and done so much studying about it. Somebody working on their doctorate degree at Stanford came to him for all this information. Now, my uncle died at 64. And when he died, at his funeral, they were playing music, like Native American music. And I always had this thought, I think, he was probably at the Battle of Little Bighorn. It just seemed he was so connected. It was all from the perspective of the Native Americans, all of his studies. A week after he died, he came to me so clearly, and he said, I was Sean Flowers in a previous life. Sean Flowers. My uncle's name's Stan Feigenbaum. Okay, same initials. And I said, is Sean Flowers, I said, was Sean, I said, are you paralyzed? And he said, no. And he had been sitting in a wheelchair that had a table, and he slid out from under it, and he went like this. And I remembered one of the things that was so hard for him is that he no longer had the ability to use his hands and his arms. And I said, this is all in this lucid experience, I said, do you have a message for Roseanne? Because I realized he was dead. Roseanne is my aunt. And he said, yes. And he said, J-O-E, just like that. And I said, Joe, and he said, Joey. So all of a sudden he fades out, and he's gone, and I called my aunt that day. So I had this message, I had this visitation from Stan, does the name Joe or Joey mean anything to you? And she said, yes. And she said that a young man in his 20s who was a nephew of hers had died 3 months previously of testicular cancer. His name was Joe, but he was always called Joey. Not somebody I'd ever heard of or known. And so when I got that information, there was validation for me that my uncle indeed was Sean Flowers in a previous life. So I've been on this journey, this mission to discover Sean Flowers. And I assume that Sean Flowers is connected to the Battle of Little Bighorn in some way. So let's fast forward some time. I'm asked to write an article on various Bay Area psychics, because I've been editor-in-chief of National Mind, Body, Spirit magazines. I've been in that world for a long time. And so the publisher of this magazine chooses somebody I don't know. At the time, I'm living in Corte Madera. And I'm on the phone, and I'm speaking to this psychic in Oakland, a woman named Stash McMurray, who I don't know. And at the end, it was about a half an hour interview, and I just felt like this personal connection with her. I liked her. And I just mentioned my Uncle Stan, And she goes, wait, wait, wait. She goes, he's here, he's pointing to his forehead. Does he have a high forehead? And I said, no, he was, injured, and hit in the head. And she goes, he likes the ting-ting sound. He said, you make a ting-ting sound. I think, what is she thinking about? That week, all of a sudden I realized I had made out of giant PVC pipe, I had put together a set with tingsha bells, circular saw blade, pot lids, all kinds of car keys on dental floss, all kinds of little bells. Anything that could possibly go ting-ting was on my ting-ting set. So there she is in Oakland talking about the ting-ting set, and I love like percussion and all kinds of sounds, and I had made this big set sitting right there, like 3 or 4 feet away from me. So so that was validation that she's really tuned in to something that she can't physically see. She's in Oakland, I'm in Corte Madera, she doesn't even know me. And so we start talking, and I'm talking about, I think my uncle was at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And she goes, yes, yes, yes. She goes, wait a minute. He's pointing to his head. He was injured and wounded in that battle. And then all of a sudden, I just put it together. And I said, it's the same person who threw the ball in his lifetime. The same person that wounded him in that one. And she said, yes, he was absolutely validating that. And then she said, he's showing me something, and she said, this is the way she was describing it. It looks like it's kind of like a billy club. And she said, but it's wood. It's got like three sections to it. And he said, this is his heart song, and you can call him. And I'm thinking, what is she talking about? And he says, you have this. And so I'm looking around, what is she talking about? And all of a sudden, on my ting-ting set, kind of propped on it, is a 3-pronged rattle. Now, what could be more Native American than a drum and a rattle? It was just, this amazing thing. So for like the last over 20 years, I've been on this search for Sean Flowers. And so a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to speak to a very large writers organization in San Diego. And I get on the plane out of Oakland, because at the time I'm living in the Bay Area, and I had C-section seat, which means, one of the last people to board the plane. And so I see in the 5th row of the plane, there's a middle seat. I'm going, oh boy, a middle seat. Nobody really wants to sit in middle seats. So I sit down, and it turns out the guy sitting right next to me is working on a book. We have such a strong connection, this is really interesting because the people who are running the conference were supposed to pick me up at the airport. But the night before, they sent me an email saying, oh, we're so sorry, we have to be other places, you're going to need to take an Uber to the hotel. Well, it turns out I wind up going to this man's house and having dinner with him and his wife, and they drive me to the hotel. I mean, it was this really deep connection. He winds up joining the organization because he's working on a book, the organization I'm speaking for. And then a group of us go out to lunch afterwards. Now it turns out this man is an expert in genealogy. So I bring up this whole thing around, my uncle. And when I'm back in California, where I was living at the time, 3 days later I get an email, and he has traced a woman, because remember this was Sean Flowers, he has traced a woman whose last name is Flowers. The grandson is Andrew Flowers, whose grandmother was given a parcel of land on the Little Bighorn. It's like, okay, so that's as close as I've gotten so far, but I'm still on that journey, and I believe that I will prove the existence of Sean Flowers, and it'll probably be another book that I write. So I'm just really excited about that. I actually want to end with something that Wayne Dyer said. Many of you know Wayne Dyer. He's written a lot of books. He died recently, and like last year, and I've interviewed Wayne like 3 times throughout the years, and I was one of the last people to interview him before he died. I was invited as one of 8 journalists from around the country to be on a call with him. And the criteria to be on the call was that we had to read his last book that had just come out, which was I Can See Clearly Now, which was over 400 pages. We had to agree to read the book, and each of these 8 journalists from these major magazines around the country, we each got to ask him just one question. And so I was the first person on the call, and the call was recorded, and then all the publishers took the transcription, and they each made an article for their magazines. And so I asked him, because in that book he was talking about the difference between a prayer of pleading versus gratitude. And so he said, because there's prayers like, oh God, please help me, please. Or there's like, God, thank you for this, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I was asking him a question about the difference between prayers of pleading and prayers of gratitude. Guess which one works?
Gratitude.
Right, gratitude. So we bring gratitude to it all. Just know that you can ask for absolutely anything you want to be, do, or have. You can ask. You can ask such things as fill in the blank questions of the universe. You can say, what does it take for me to have, be, do? And just allow the universe to fill in the blanks. Thank you.